A lot of people think retirement is the finish line. You work hard, you save well, you build up your portfolio, and then you're done. But I can tell you, after more than 2 decades advising successful international high net worth families, that's not at all how it works. Because retiring and then staying retired are two very, very different things. I've seen people with multi-million-pound portfolios slowly get sucked right back into work because the perfect plan they built on paper fell apart once life began to veer off course. Time and time again, this all comes down to easily avoidable but very costly mistakes. Mistakes will pull you right back into the grind even when you thought that you were done. In this video today, I'm going to count down the 7 biggest mistakes that even very wealthy retirees make. I'm going to show you exactly what to do instead if you want to stay in control of your time, your money, and your freedom. Just make sure to grab the retirement checklist we put together specifically for high net worth individuals. It's exactly the same framework that we use with our own clients to make sure that they don't lose freedom, purpose, peace of mind in retirement. You can download it for free using the link in the description below and use it to check your plan as we go through things on this video. Working backwards, we'll start with mistake number 7. Now, I want to tell you about a friend of my father. Like a lot of people who come to us looking for help with their retirement plan, he insisted on having lots of cash going into retirement because it made him feel safe. Like he was always prepared for those unexpected expenses or the ups and the downs of the market. But there is a really big downside to this approach. Because he kept large sums of cash sitting idle during market swings, thinking this actually protected him from the volatility of the market, he ended up missing out on huge levels of future compounded growth. And to his untrained eye, this felt very sensible and it felt okay. But to our professional eye, and as shown on our planning software, it cost him and his heirs savagely, absolutely decimating his future net worth. And this is the exact mistake, relying on cash as a safety net. Because whilst this feels safe to us over time, it quietly destroys your future purchasing power, just like termites eating away at your financial freedom and your future life choices. The problem is that cash rarely keeps pace with inflation, even in today's higher interest rate environment. Plus, panic moves, jumping in and out of markets during market dips, can lock in your losses and harm your future net worth. On the flip side, having too little cash can also force you to sell investments during downturns, locking in your losses there too. To fix this, one approach is to set up a tiered system. For example, you could keep 6 months of cash for unknowns like emergencies and a year's worth of cash for known expenses like tax and necessities. And then you can invest 2 to 5 years worth of living costs in high quality, short-dated bonds like a family war chest, and put the rest of it to work in a global, diversified portfolio, your family fortress. This gives you both the war chest for safety and the family fortress for growth, helping you weather volatility without derailing your future retirement plans. Remember, the goal here is to protect your long-term wealth and future purchasing power from the ravages of inflation. But there's another silent destroyer that creeps in even faster, and it shows up in your tax bill. And that's mistake number 6. People often assume that taxes stop once they retire, but actually they become more complicated. One successful retiree came to us a year into his retirement frustrated. He wasn't in the professional grind anymore, but he was somehow paying more tax. Turns out this was due to things such as mandatory withdrawals from pension schemes, dividend income, and other sources pushing him into a higher tax bracket. Many international retirees simply don't anticipate these. Once these tax surprises occur, it's often too late to make meaningful adjustments. Don't overlook tax planning just because you're retiring. The key is to always be proactive and engage in multi-jurisdictional tax planning well before your retirement, ideally in your 40s. Strategies such as taking partial transfers into tax-efficient vehicles can really help reduce future tax liabilities. Combining these with things such as charitable giving can offset tax bills while supporting causes that you care about. Also, carefully coordinating withdrawals from the different types of accounts and assets can often help you avoid inadvertently triggering unwelcome and higher taxes. But tax isn't the only risk that people fail to spread out. There's actually something else that can quietly also sabotage your retirement, and that's mistake number 5. Let's look at the S&P for a moment. From 2000 to 2010, the S&P saw a lost decade where it actually went backwards and made flat returns. So someone who invested in 2000 with $1 million nest egg invested only in this one index and who withdrew 5% annually would have just run out of money within 16 years. Meanwhile, a globally diversified investor following exactly the same withdrawal pattern would have ended up with more money than when they started. And that's the danger of concentrating your portfolio in only one place, especially in just 500 US stocks. And it all comes down to something we're likely all a little bit more guilty of than we'd potentially like to admit, and that's mistaking familiarity for safety. Relying solely on large US companies or any one index or any one country might feel familiar and it might feel safe. But in retirement, when you're drawing from your portfolio, this lack of diversification can be really, really dangerous. To protect your income and avoid running out of money, you must diversify globally. And that's why we call it investing in all of the great companies of the world. You're literally so well diversified that movements in any one sector, one country, or one asset class, or one index just don't matter. So don't ignore the great companies of the world. But even if you are globally diversified, you can still fall into another trap, and that's mistake number 4. One investor told me, I don't care if the market swings, I just want income that I can really count on. And he had filled his portfolio with dividend-paying stocks, convinced it would fund his retirement. And I meet investors all the time who are really attracted to dividend stocks. It's because they promise income whilst you sleep. But one thing many retirees don't realize is that when a dividend is paid, the company's share price usually drops by the same amount. You're basically receiving a chunk of the profits. Sure, that can feel great, but you're not really moving ahead and letting your wealth compound. Typically as well, dividend-focused funds often come with higher fees and underperform simple, broad market index funds. Dividends are also taxed every year in taxable accounts, which can erode returns. So, just like with mistake number 5, focus instead on buying the great companies of the world at fair prices and don't chase dividend income. Aim for total returns over time, not just yield, so that your wealth can compound. Since most companies pay dividends anyway, a globally diverse portfolio will naturally generate income without sacrificing the growth. But even a well-diversified, low-cost portfolio isn't enough if the way that you draw on it's flawed. And that's where mistake number 3 comes in. You've probably heard of the 4% rule. It's absolutely everywhere. And the idea is simple, but actually it's too simple. Withdraw 4% of your portfolio in 1 year and then adjust it for inflation. It feels safe and predictable, but here's the catch. It was built upon outdated assumptions, steady markets, moderate inflation, and flat spending throughout retirement. And real life isn't that neat at all. One client who had a $3 million portfolio and planned to withdraw $120,000 annually adjusting for inflation. On paper, this looked perfect. But when we used our software to stress test it against actual market conditions, the plan crumbled. Worse still, rigid strategies like this can lead to underspending in the early years of retirement when you're actually the healthiest, most active, and financially free. Or they can backfire entirely if poor market returns hit you early on. This is what we call sequencing risk, and it can force you to sell at a loss. Instead, use guardrails. These are flexible spending rules that adjust based upon specific market conditions. Think of them like barriers on a mountain road. They don't stop you from enjoying the drive, but they just keep you from going off the edge. One example, when markets are near their highs, you spend normally. If they drop 10 or 20%, you cut back on discretionary spending, and if they drop by more than 20%, you pause your discretionary spending altogether. This dynamic approach lets you enjoy much more in the good times and pull back during the rougher and rarer market patches without any guesswork at all. This isn't just safer, it often leads to more lifetime spending and the associated future purchasing power with making memories and doing things that are important to you with much less risk. So, mistake number 3 isn't to follow rigid withdrawal strategies. And whilst the 4% rule can cause you to spend too little, the next mistake does the exact opposite. It actually gives you a false sense of safety. Many long-term investors rely upon bonds or fixed income to cushion against big equity drops, especially in retirement. But in 2020, I know a retiree who'd loaded up on high-yield bonds, thinking that they were a smart way to generate extra income. When the market crashed, she'd expected her bonds to hold up steady. Instead, they fell apart and hard just exactly at the time when she needed them most. Not all bonds are equal in a downturn. Whilst US stocks plunged 34%, some corporate and municipal bonds also dropped by as much as 22%. The only exception was treasury bonds that actually rose in value. So, take note, chasing yield in retirement can actually backfire. Those safe, high-yield bonds, often sold by banks and brokers, often carry hidden risks that surface at the very worst time. High-quality bonds, like those issued by strong governments or rock-solid big companies, tend to hold up when fear drives money towards safer assets. In retirement, protecting your principal matters more than squeezing out every drop of income. Sometimes peace of mind is worth more than a few extra basis points. But there's one risk even seasoned investors tend to put off, not because it's small, but just because it's really uncomfortable. And that's mistake number 1. And just before we get into the details, if any of these mistakes on this list have hit close to home, then it might be time for a proper conversation. Here at AES, we offer a retirement clarity call specifically for high net worth individuals who want to stay retired with clarity and confidence. You can book that call using the link below and take the first step towards making the rest of your life the most intentional. So, I've talked about the no-go years many times before, that period after the age of 80 when things begin to slow down and care often becomes necessary. And yes, long-term care is a risk, but it's also something that you can easily plan for if you do it early enough. A client once told me, "I've planned for everything except getting old." And that's much more common than you might think. That's why we'd recommend modelling every single client's plan through to the age of 100 and then stress testing it with future different scenarios. Things such as, what happens if I pass away suddenly? What happens if I'm injured and can't make decisions for myself anymore? Or how will my spouse or my family cope emotionally and financially if I die? We make sure all of the right protections are in place, the right types of insurance and the right documents, the right wills, the right powers of attorney, the right protocols, and the right funding strategy. Long-term care planning impacts more than just health. It affects when you retire, how much risk you can take, and what exactly you leave behind. The key is to always be proactive and don't avoid it out of fear because it's uncomfortable to think about, or waste money on one-size-fits-all insurance. Tailor it to your actual needs and optimize everything that you can as soon as you can, because it will make a tremendous difference. And in life, remember that time always wins. There you have it, the 7 biggest mistakes that quietly pull even the wealthy, well-prepared people back into the working world. But here's the thing, avoiding mistakes isn't the same as making truly smart decisions. You also need to know exactly what to track to get the clarity, confidence, and control regarding your ideal best future. So, watch this video next where I break down the 5 key numbers that drive early retirement, how to calculate them for your own plan.